My talk this evening, as I have it, is entitled The Islamization of Europe. And I'd like to start with two quotes. The first is from Niall Ferguson, who's a professor and a well-known English history author. A youthful Muslim society to the south and east of the Mediterranean is poised to colonize a senescent Europe to the north and west. And a second quote. There are signs that Allah will grant Islam victory in Europe without swords, without guns, without conquests. The 50 million of Muslims of Europe will turn it into a Muslim continent within a few decades. Europe is in a predicament, and so is America. Muammar Gaddafi on Al Jazeera television, April 2006. Now, what would an Islamic Europe mean? First thing to understand is this is nothing whatsoever to do with race. This is a question of culture and religion. Many, for instance, in Europe now, the largest growing Christian community is the black community, and there are very significant numbers of white Muslims. So forget anything you thought you were going to hear about a race-related discussion tonight. This is not race, this is culture, this is religion. An Islamic Europe would be a Europe ruled, as are all full Islamic states, by the Quran, Sharia law. As far as any good Muslim is concerned, the only law that you need is contained within the Quran, which, unlike the Christian Bible, is literally the word of God as dictated. What would rule under the Quran mean? It would mean no freedom of speech, because freedom of speech is haram, forbidden. It's all there in the Quran. You don't need to think for yourself. Follow the Quran, follow the hadiths, the accounts of the preachings and sayings and doings of Muhammad, and that's all you need. There would be no democracy. You may think, well, democracy is one of the fundamentals of all Western societies. Indeed it is. But don't think it's one of the fundamentals of all societies of all time. It is most definitely not a fundamental of Islam, because again, if you have a democracy, the people make the rules. Under Islam, Allah and the Quran are the rules. There would be no common law, none of our legal system. There would be no scientific inquiry. There would be no freedom of worship or freedom of unbelief. For women, women have automatically a second-class status under Islam. It's possible to say that compared with the status that women had in 6th or 7th century pagan Arabia, at least Muhammad in the Quran gave a degree of codification and a degree of protection. But by our rights, by our standards of complete equality with women, a religion which treats women as second-class citizens automatically, a religion which says that a woman's witness in a court is worth half that of a man, a religion which says that a woman cannot have the same inheritance right as a man, a religion which makes a woman the chattel of her husband or her father, is not a religion compatible with our Western values. We have throughout the whole of Western Europe right now an epidemic of what they call honour killings. These are the killings of women, virtually all of them Muslim. It happens in a few Christian Eastern European sects as well, but almost all of them Muslim, murdered very often brutally by their own fathers, by their own cousins, by their own brothers, for crimes such as falling in love with someone, not even necessarily from a different religion, but from a different tribe. In 2004, the British police force investigated 117 suspected cases of honour killing. This is something absolutely unbelievably horrific, I would say, to anyone brought up with our values, but it's what you get if you have an Islamic state. Crime and punishment. Many people on the conservative right throughout the world, Europe, America, Britain, say that there should be tougher punishments for criminals. But the idea that a young child should have their hand cut off because when starving they stole a loaf of bread, as happens in Islamic countries, is to us absolutely barbaric. But it's what you get. That, I suppose, only affects a small number of people, especially when you have those kind of punishments. But in a traditional Islamic society, everybody who is not a Muslim is compelled to second-class status. The term is a zimmi, which is someone who has submitted, someone who refuses to convert, but having submitted, accepts certain second-class positions. They have to pay a special tax, the jizya. They must get out of the road, out of the way when Muslims come. Their buildings must be lower than Muslim buildings. They mustn't teach their children about Islam unless their children are taken from them. It's a form of perpetual religious and cultural apartheid whereby the non-Muslim population is ground down. And that is the standard position under a firm Islamic state. It's not necessarily been the case under all Islamic states all of the time. Islam has gone through different periods throughout history. Sometimes it's been harsher, sometimes it's been softer. But certainly the kind of Islam we're seeing taking over Europe now is of the harsher variety. How is it happening that Muammar Gaddafi and one of Britain's leading modern historians says that Europe is going to become Islamic virtually without a fight? There's a number of reasons. Firstly, it's about immigration. Europe has been affected by a massive wave of immigration since the Second World War from various parts of the Third World, but increasingly now from Islamic states. Now, to any other people, almost throughout history, immigration is a matter of the draw of a better life for yourself and your children. It's an economic or a social decision. Immigration under Islam has a semi-religious significance because Muhammad and his followers emigrated from Mecca to Medina as part of the struggle to create and to spread Islam. And the early emigrants, al-Muhajirun, are actually commemorated in the Quran, that people who emigrate in order to spread the cause of Islam and Allah are particularly blessed. So this religion has right at its heart a divinely ordained push to emigrate to other people's countries in order to convert them to Islam. So this has an effect. There's proposals now from the European Union that a further 20 million immigrants are needed in Europe over the next few years, despite the fact that, for instance, Britain has 8 million economically inactive adults. But nevertheless, because mass immigration equals cheap labour, equals very big profits for capitalists, because of that, the powers that be in Europe are constantly pushing for more immigration. They're now saying Europe needs 20 million quickly, and the majority, the vast majority of those will come from Islamic countries. On top of that, there's a hugely differential birth rate. In Britain, for instance, they will tell someone, the government will say, oh, the birth rate in Britain is approximately 1.8 children per woman of childbearing age, which is true, but that, of course, is an average. When you look behind the average, you find that the average birth rate for an indigenous Britain, someone who's English or Scots or Irish or Welsh, from those communities, our birth rate is approximately 1.2. The birth rate, say, of the Bangladeshi or the Pakistani community is approximately 5 children per woman of childbearing age. Our women, on average, don't start having children until they're basically 30, whereas the women from these Muslim communities start having children when they're about 18. So the generations are quicker, and on top of that, they have far more children. And when you compound that up over several generations, it has a huge, huge effect. There's also a factor of very aggressive conversions. In France, at this very minute, France, one of the centres of traditional European civilization, 70% of all prisoners in French prisons are Muslims. Many of those are people from an Islamic background who aren't particularly Islamic when they go to prison, but once they're in there, they're targeted by imams. They're helped by imams, to be honest, as well. They do a good job looking after their prisoners. As a result, people go in as petty criminals and come out as reformed, fanatical Muslims, hell-bent on utterly changing the society they've come out into. And on top of that, finally, there's also increasingly an impact on what is called by the liberals even white flight, which means people of our ethnicity looking around at the place where they now live, seeing it changing, finding their children, particularly in, it's not a racial thing. It doesn't happen, for instance, in Sikh